Let's start with what this fall has been like for you two. What have been some of the highs? What have been some of the struggles, the successes, the challenges? Give us kind of a rundown.
I think our biggest high, especially most recently, is we have been talking to our kids a lot about integrity, growth mindset, and to hear them explain things in their own words and how they're really feeling about how the classroom's working, and hearing them be able to use that big vocabulary and be able to really break down their thinking, that's been probably one of the biggest highs for me.
Yeah, I think a big high for me has been seeing them explain their thinking to each other and really having thoughtful conversations in general about academics, about character, about being in a community, having them talk to each other and find each other's best points and really celebrating each other as a larger community, because with 62 learners, it sometimes can be difficult to make sure that all voices are heard. So I think that it's been really empowering for the kids to know that they are the ones who are in the lead of our classroom, our community.
Right, and seeing them work together, because we switch groups so often, so seeing them work and interact together with different people, not just their friends that they came into us working with, and seeing those interactions and those relationships grow. That's been really cool.
So how do you handle the grouping per se? I mean, with that wide of a range of ages that you're dealing with, how do you handle putting kids in small groups, and how do you determine that? And do the kids sometimes determine it? Do you always determine it? How do you do the grouping side of things?
It's a very good question.
That is a good question. I think sometimes the kids, their performance and their willingness to be a self-learner. We've talked a lot about being self-directed and what that means. If they really have an understanding to that and a good grasp of that, we sometimes give them the reins and say, okay, you're ready to lead your own learning. There's some kids that have been in of a more structured environment for a longer period of time that sometimes are having a little bit harder of a time to just say, well, is this what you want me to do? Is this right? So we kind of have those kids that maybe like a little bit more direction on maybe a little bit different track. So that sometimes makes our reading groups and our math groups different. So the kids that I know, like the flipped lessons and not as much small group meeting times, we send them to work, and then we check their work periodically throughout the day to make sure that we're not finding any, and then we have another group or groups of learners that need more guidance.
So right now in reading particularly, we have a group that has one facilitator monitoring them, making some of their small lessons for them, and that facilitator has first graders through fifth graders.
Yes.
And in that group, they're the kids, like she said, that are more self-motivated. They like to learn. They like to dig deep. They can take more of their learning by the reins and kind of drive themselves. Then we have another group that also has first through fifth grade. Well, they all have first through fifth grade, I think. But they have all the different grade levels and really all the different levels. But the second group, some of them are a little bit more behavior, and some of them just need that guidance as to, okay, here is what has to be done by this period of time, because they're not able to self-monitor as well yet. They're getting there, but not quite yet. So they are a little bit in that in-between part. And then our other group is our most at-need kids
Learners.
For reading. And again, at all grade levels and all learning levels, but they're the kids that need the most direct time, and so that group's right now is our smallest group, so that they can have that most
a lot of conferencing, a lot of small group interactions, not necessarily just with a facilitator, but with other learners. So we made that group a very small group of learners. So with a wide range of learning levels, it just is a smaller group that needs more attention.
You know, for a lot of teachers, I think what you described, like you just used the term small lessons. I think for a lot of teachers, they can understand how to do this with practice kinds of activities, but How do you handle direct instruction when you have kids in so many different places? I mean, is it always from you? Do you have other ways that kids get direct instruction? How do you deal with that?
Again, it depends on the group, but we do flipped lessons. We do videos, especially with the knowledge basic recall standards. The kids can watch a video and practice it, and then we'll make sure they keep applying it to what they're learning. We also do small groups. So in that group that I have right now, I'm kind of have the in-between group right now. So I will meet with this group and we'll do something that they need while these kids are working on their needs. And then I'll switch and meet with this group while these kids are working. Or the group that needs conferencing more, we'll have more time set aside for individual conference time too.
And we also have a time set aside in our schedule where kids get to work on what they feel they need to work on, or if they feel like they're getting behind in something, which there's not really a behind. We don't know where that came from, but they feel like they have things that they have that need attention right now. So we kind of cut out a time where it was no instruction unless there was something that they were confused about, they could request. And some of our older learners are now taking some of the spelling patterns that some of our younger learners are struggling with in their writing. Some of our older learners are taking that and teaching that to some of our younger learners. So
we kind of call it a study hall where the kids work on what their needs are, and that's another time where we deliver that small group instruction if need be. So if we didn't get to somebody or somebody just didn't get it within their group during reading or math, we will take that time to do it again too.
Because you're not doing group instruction, a whole class kind of instruction, how do you, first of all, monitor where the kids are at in their learning, but also how do you even assess what their needs are at a given moment?
We have different assessments for every standard. So we make a rubric for standards, and then we talk about it, and they're based off of that standards evolution. We look at that and we create a rubric.
The TIE standards evolution.
Yep. And the kids that are going strong right now, they're getting their tasks on fresh grade, and they're doing like performance-based tasks. And we're going then and looking at those tasks, and we're able to assess them on whatever standards they were hitting. Where some of the kids that aren't on that pace necessarily, they're still making those, what are they?
They're still making the performance base, or they're still doing the performance base, but it's more chunked for them.
Right.
So we can't give them 4 things that are going to all
clump together.
Accumulate together. We have to give them 4 right now. Our hope is that we're going to be able to do 1 and then 2 and then 3, but they have been in an environment where it hasn't been, it's been amazing for them, but it makes them a little bit more,
we have a group of kids that has a need to hear their teacher's opinion. Okay. Kind of, is that what you're getting at?
They need more feedback.
Yeah, they want more feedback. Yeah, that's exactly.
So they're getting, when they get those 4 at a time, they're kind of sinking. So we're slowly building those kids up. So some of them, like that one, and she started in that way, and she's already moved. She can get all of them at once, and she's going. Where some of the kids, we're giving them 2 things, and they'll work on those 2 things, and then we'll give them the next thing, just to kind of take that load off of them and the overwhelming feeling.
So do you find with the kids that you're working with, are there some kids that this environment is harder for them than other kids? I mean, I think there's a perception that, oh, this is all for the top kids, but I don't know that's necessarily been my experience. What have you seen as far as the kids who embrace this well and kids who have trouble?
I think this year is kind of a transition year, I think, for all of us. So ask me that question next year, because I think I'll have a better understanding of it. I think right now in our first year, we had a lot of a learning curve. I had been teaching in an age-specific classroom for 13 years previous to this. So I had to untrain some of those things that I maybe wanted to step in instead of giving them their freedom with guidance. Was something that I had to. So I think that the kids, some of those kids that we have on a different track could be further along if we
hadn't made all the changes that we have made.
Yes. So I think, our startup was very important. Our startup, how we started up, was very important in how we developed, and now where we're at, it was very important. It was something we had to go through, but it also didn't help progress some of those kids that, you know, when we're teaching growth mindset, and they need to understand that it's, well, is this your best? It's not
Right.
my best. This isn't what I think my best is for Susie.
We want,
And so I think that's been a change, and that's something that we didn't address right away. So now we're playing a little bit of a catch up.
right. So we started here and we had to take a bunch of steps backwards because of different things, and now we're back moving
Closer
forward.
to our vision.
And some of the kids that we thought, oh, this will be awesome for, might not be embracing it as in the way that we expected them to. And
Yes.
some of the kids that we thought wouldn't embrace it have totally blown our minds. They have jumped in. So I have no idea who this is working best for and who it.
Yes.
Well, we know who from our kids, but there's no, like, we can't pinpoint the characteristics of those kids, because some of our kids that are academically the lowest have embraced it amazingly, and some of them that are the highest have embraced it, and some that are the lowest haven't, and some that are the highest haven't. So it's just not that they haven't embraced it at all, but just not to the extent of others.
What's your thinking with the students right now? You said there was kind of a step backwards, and then you kind of got to where your vision was. Was that step backwards more about you being ready, or was it getting the kids ready, or was it a little bit of both?
I would say it was both.
Yeah.
I think, you know, when we started this journey last year, and even I would say like a few of us were dabbling in it even the year before that, reading the books, I think we embraced a vision that we expected on day one. We expected something that was unrealistic. We didn't realize a transition period that maybe some of the learners and the facilitators were going to need.
And we had expectations for ourselves and each other that we would be able to start it, but there were things like that we had to learn, and we had to learn each other's strengths as well. So like right now, Megan leads the community meetings, and this morning I took one of our little struggling guys for a walk during the community meeting. So at the beginning, we expected to all go in and all be able to know exactly what to do and to be able to make it work for the kids, and it didn't. So we had to kind of pull at each other's strengths and realize that we had some misconceptions about different things, but that we've had to talk a lot. We've had to have communication with each other a lot.
And we've asked for our students,
Yes,
our
yes.
learners needed to communicate to us, what can we do to make learning better for you?
Right.
And
because
they've given us a lot
lot.
of very valuable feedback.
Right.
For one learner, we can help them with their feedback, and with another one, it might not be as easy, but very valuable feedback from our
Right, and if
learners.
we're not sure what to do about, like yesterday for science, we were struggling a little bit, and I didn't know how to approach it again. So then we had a meeting, and we talked about what's the best way to do this, because it's not working right now. We need to get there. And so just having that open communication with the kids, and Megan sends out emails every morning, and the kids feel comfortable enough to really, good or bad, explain their feelings, and we're able to learn from them more than just from ourselves.
So if we had a new school somewhere with teachers wanting to transition from all age group to multi-age, what would you say is the advice you would give on the transitions? What do they need to tackle first? What do you need to work on over time? What advice would you give someone stepping into this?
I would tell them start one day at a time. Think about one day, reflect on that day, and move to the next day. I mean, I really feel like we had done a lot of research, and we did a lot of really good research, and we had done a lot of planning, but we didn't do the kind of planning that was really necessary once we got in it. Once we started school, we didn't, and I don't even know if you can do that without knowing your learners.
Right.
I don't even know if you can do that before. I think you need to read about it. I think you need to learn about it. You need to know what you believe about learners and how they learn best. But really, you have to take one day at a time.
And you have to be willing to take learner input from every age that you're working with and every kid, because there might be, for the every age part, some of our littlest people haven't been as programmed, so they're able to give insight on their learning and thinking about it that the kids who've been more programmed aren't able to realize. And then as far as every kid's input, there might be a second grade boy at this level and a second grade boy at this level, but they learn differently. So being able to step back and realize, that was a big thing for me, realize that it's not going to, what I plan for this group isn't going to work for every kid. So I have to sometimes, even if it's as simple as this kid gets his question through an email and this kid gets it on a worksheet, or not a worksheet, but a piece of paper to glue in their workbook. Sometimes there's just different ways that work better for kids, and being able to take that step back and realize, Megan reminds me of this all the time, we're here for the kids. So taking their input's the hugest part that we've been able to do, because that's helped us make them more engaged in their learning, and then they're actually interested in what they're doing.
Okay.
And one last thing I would tell the people, if they were thinking about starting this, is be ready, because it's the best journey that you will be on.
Yeah.
It's a very wonderful professional experience for you to have.
There's something amazing about talking with a group about finding the volume of something and then getting a hug from a first grader. There's just something so neat, and we've made it so now we work with every kid.
Learner.
We took a step back and we had more specific. So I had this group, Megan had this group, and Sarah had this group. And now we've made it so we really are truly working with every single kid, and it's amazing. Yep. It's so cool.
Except your days that you feel like you didn't meet your vision, but continue every day with a positive attitude and think about what you can do better than you did the day before.
You put in a lot of work in the beginning, and obviously in a transition like this, that's going to happen. What took a lot of that work? Give me some specifics. What is it that you really had to work on in the beginning, and how have you streamlined it so it isn't quite the volume of work of what it was in the beginning?
Well, I think we wanted our learners to be working at a complex thinking level
right away,
all day. And so I think that we overwhelmed them at first when expecting them to do that all day long. I think the work that we have done now is we have our rubrics set up before we go into lessons. We have rubrics set up, or progression of learning and multiplication. You know, we don't necessarily have a multiplication rubric, but we have a progression. So we can see, okay, this learner is working at this level. They can go back a step and do a complex thinking task that's a little bit not right at their cutting edge, but then they can be working at that recall level at the very edge of right where they're learning at. So I think that was, you know, we wanted them to be creating and producing commercials and, you know, making cereal boxes, and we wanted to do that right out the gate, and we realized that we had to take a step back and make sure that the recall was able to apply.
Right.
So
we also, amongst ourselves, we were going out, and I was creating everything for my group, and Megan was creating everything for her group, and Sarah was creating everything for her group. And we were really realizing that sometimes we were creating the same thing, but we are just both doing that. We are both carrying the full load instead of separating it out amongst the three of us. So we've really gotten better. This is something we're still really working on, is communicating not only how the day went and what we're working on, but also where the kids are. Since we do flip-flop the kids so often and change groups, we're really working on that, and we're feeding off of each other more, and
helping apply with what Miss Kaufman's doing in her math group. I can say, okay, now I know you were talking about this with Miss Kaufman, but when you have, sometimes in math, we could have 50 to 70 different groups of learners working at different levels. So that is where it becomes a little tricky for us to be able to, but we're getting better at it.
That's what we're working. That's our goal right now, is to get better within our math groups as well.
Yes.
And then the rubrics and things help us with that too, because if I know that on this progression, Megan has a group here, and I have these kids, there's 4 of them that are getting fractions like whoof, way over their heads. Well, they're not over their heads, but way above where they have to be. And I know that we're closing that gap. So knowing that she has a group there and knowing I have a group almost there, soon we may be able to combine. But just having that communication so we aren't doing the same thing and overlapping with each other and making more work for ourselves.
You've touched on several things I'd like to get back to, but you mentioned the collaboration that you have had in putting this together. How is this different than a traditional room? What is it about inter-teacher collaboration that you see different in this environment?
It's the best thing ever.
It is the best thing. The best thing.
Yeah, but tell me, what does it look like? What do you have to do?
We come in every morning, and I'm an early morning, and Megan's a late night stayer. So I come in just because I have to get my stuff together. And then when Megan comes in, we sit together and we discuss what we're going to work on, or what we are working on. Or today I had to ask her a fraction question because my fraction kids are almost where hers are, and we want to make sure that we're teaching it in all ways so they're understanding no matter how they're given. So we meet in the morning, and then throughout the day we are constantly
And the thing that's different about my collaboration with Kacee is when we meet in the morning is we're talking about how can we meet together and feed off, okay, she looks at fractions different than I look at fractions. And so that's great because the kids get to look at fractions because as much as I want to say they look at fractions from their own perspective, they still see it from my direction too. Because when I'm talking to them and having those thoughtful conversations, they still get to see how I see them. And that's something that I really am trying to get away from, but I'm not there yet.
But it's hard too.
So when we're talking, it is at a deeper level than I have talked to with other colleagues because her students are my students and my students are her students. And we want to make sure that she's throwing this angle at them and I'm throwing this angle and another angle because they have to be able to see it from the different perspectives.
Right. So this kind of meeting, then we go into our lunch that can be anywhere from this long to this long, and we take a little break. We take a break and we get our minds for 10 minutes. She walks to the room and I go to the lunchroom. We just take that little bit of time to let our brains rest, and then we go right back at it, and we're just constantly discussing the kids and their needs. And I'm not meeting this kid's need. Do you have suggestions? And it's so amazing that they're all our kids, so we know all of them, and to be able to build off of each other. And it goes the same for behaviors. If she has a child that's just not able to focus, or if I have one that's just not able to focus, we can flip that child and still be meeting their needs because we know their needs, but they might not be working with me that day. And they might need a different, and that's another way that we can help each other out, and we can talk about these children and figure out what am I missing with him, because he's able to work for you, not for you. He's able to work with you, and I'm not able to get that relationship. So just being able to connect on that level and see what we're missing so that we can really dig deeper with the kids.
And another thing that I had never experienced with a colleague is I get to listen to the thoughtful conversations Kacee has and Sarah has with the learners. So the way I talk to kids, I get to take the best things from my colleagues and apply that, and makes me grow as in my profession and just gets better at my trade. There was a quote, and I cannot remember, it was probably from George Grosso, but about how you need to surround yourself, if you want to get better at something, you need to surround yourself with the people that do better at it. The five people that are better at it. And I am doing that this year. Truly doing that.
And what it looks like, honestly, sometimes at night, it's a text from Megan to the group or me to the group or Sarah, and we say, here's what's going on, or I found this really inspirational thing, or I need help with this. And a lot of it is honestly random communication that way too, because we're not just colleagues and we're not just co-teachers, but we've become a community. We're just as much a family as all of our kids are. So having that connection is just crazy.
From your perspective, I mean, it sounds like This is a lot of work. What's made it worth it? I mean, why go to all this effort?
What we were just talking about, the having those kids and seeing them be excited about their learning and learning from each other every day. I don't know that I could go and not work directly with somebody else.
I couldn't go back.
Because I've learned so much, but also having those deep conversations with kids and being able to see what they're excited about and have it include their learning. It's just crazy.
And it sounds probably like a lot of work, but really, I think that I'm doing the same amount of work, or maybe less. Because, I mean, our conversations take more time. That is added time. But I think that since a lot of our learners, the majority of our learners really are embracing being a self-directed learner, you give them a little snip and they can take it for, 2 days.
Right. And having that part of it too, having the kids take their learning and not have it be forced. There's still days when I'm telling a child, come on, we got to do this, we got to do this. And then I remind myself, the reason this child's not excited about it is because I'm presenting it in a way that's not meeting their needs.
Or it's not motivating
to
them.
Or Megan will say, hey, have you tried this with that child? And we're able, just seeing then those kids that have never, or at the beginning didn't embrace what they were doing in school and have them be excited about a project that they now did at home, that's
And another
best
reason why I think I'm a little more motivated, the workload isn't as bad, is I have 2 children within 2 learners. So I think that, as a professional, I see it as very rewarding, just hearing the learners discuss. But also as a parent, as a mom, I get to see my daughter really excited about learning and coming home and talking not just about the content that she's learning, but about how she's learning and how she learns best. So I think that is so inspiring and so deep.
And we started off where it was a lot of work, and that's when we were each doing our own work, and we'd be at the school from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m. and we were draining ourselves, but that was something we had to learn. We had to go through that to learn that we needed each other. We needed to bounce off of each other's strengths and weaknesses and work together. And we wouldn't have become this family without that part of it. So if you're starting out and it is so much work and so hard, it will get better. That's part of the learning process. It's part of going through it and learning your students and learning each other, or learning your learners.
Yep. That was a growth mindset that we had to continue to strive, continue to work through the trial.
Fight through it to get to where we are.
You talked a little bit earlier about rubrics. Tell me a little bit about how you use rubrics as opposed to maybe more traditional grading system in giving feedback to kids. How does it work? What does it look like?
We peel apart our standards because, especially in reading, they're based from K to 12 off of the same, it's a stepping block. So we usually look at the standards evolution and we see what the kids really need to know to get to that next.
Or what is the
main
same.
chunk. Yep, but amongst them. And then we break the standards into those levels, those grade levels, or those, I don't know a better term for it, first grade, second grade, which is just that step. And we clump them into a lower level, a mid-level, and an upper level. And then we look at that lower level and we think of basic recall, a complex thinking, and a very complex thinking. And we do that at all of our different levels so that we see the kids need the basic recall before you can expect this complex thinking out of them.
Right, and we also really help the kids learn or see, more than learn, but see that it's not an end. That look where you started, and wow, look what you have learned through this. Not a, did I get an A?
Right.
Look how much you have grown through that standard, and you don't get to stop here. You get to keep
going
learning
and keep applying it. Then we go back and analyze a lot too. We analyze at the beginning, look what you said perspective was. And then look where you dug deeper. And now look at you applying your perspective in an argument to solve the issue at recess. So just seeing, going back and analyzing where we started, like she said, and where we get. And knowing that where we get isn't the end. Knowing that we can keep going and going.
So really the emphasis is less about grades as a motivator and more about the building blocks of learning and where they're at and where they're going to be. Interesting.
And we think back on B a lot. She said the first time we saw her, I think it was, wasn't it? That Megan reminds us of this all the time. It's no good to go through every standard and barely touch it and have the kids not understand it. It's way better to take the things that you're going to teach and teach them so the kids are complex into them. Make sure that those kids really get it, because if you go through every standard and the kids get 2 of them, you might as well have spent all that time on 4 of them and they actually know what you did.
Sure.
Digging deeper.
Right. And we take a lot of the standards and try to lump them together. So in our point of view, we were doing comparing and contrasting, higher level thinking, questioning,
Character
traits, all of that, even within. But our big focus was perspective and point of view.
And that's where we struggled at the beginning, because we began wanting to start with those big projects, but we realized, well, the kids aren't ready for the complex questioning. They're not ready for the character traits. They're not. So we were trying to lump them together before they were ready for those individual pieces. And I think that was hard for us to go teach those individual skills before we were able to make them into projects and things like that.
A lot of customized projects focus a lot on pace and accelerating pace. It sounds like you're not really so focused on pace. It's more about depth. I mean, is that?
Yes.
We are more focused on depth, but the kids can move at their own pace as well. So if they really get point of view, we had this one little girl that was so excited because she wrote a narrative, and she dug so deep, and she got done with it in a way shorter period of time than some of the other kids did. And so they're still at their own pace, but they have to meet that deepness before they're going to move on to the next thing.
Okay.
But somebody might meet that deepness in a week, and somebody might take 3 weeks to really dig deep into it. So that's where our pacing comes in. But we are more focused on them getting the deep knowledge.
And through that, when you really understand something, your pace goes faster. I think what we're finding out is, especially I'm noticing it a lot in math, is if I really drill down and really make them think about what multiplication is, they can multiply decimals, they can multiply fractions. If they have a real drill deep knowledge of decimals and fractions and multiplication, it comes easy.
Then they can combine
their
them
pace
and
is fast. It's just those building blocks of really understanding
Digging
what
deep.
you know and taking it to that next level.
Do you ever get concerned? I think one of the hesitations of teachers getting into this is that, well, some kids will just get further and further and further behind if we only go at a pace comfortable for them. Do you have that struggle, or is it does it work itself out? Tell us about the kids who...
I think we meet a lot with our kids. There is always concern that kids aren't getting where they need to be. But we have our kids grouped in ways that they're always meeting with someone, so they're not able to just stall. We're able to see what they really need, and they're either moved into a different group, so they're getting that need, or they are meeting individually. They're conferencing with us so that we can see what's not clicking, but they're never pushed on to the next part before that they grasp that.
Well, and I think a thing that really has been refreshing to me is that some kids that need more work in one area can stay on that area all school year long.
Right.
But then they can be working at different levels for different things. So let's just take, for example, in math, a child may not be working at where an age specific or where standardized testing says that they need to be working in, what did I say?
Multiplication.
Multiplication. Okay, so they can stay on multiplication for the whole, well, multiplication and division the whole school year long, but it's not going to hold them back in measurement.
In fractions.
It's not going to hold, it might in fractions because, I mean, math,
Right.
everything connects, but they still can be getting exposure to other things that at their grade level
that they need.
Yeah. So if we, like, one specific learner that I am thinking of is, she told me, she said, Mrs. Moody, at the beginning of the school year, I know I don't understand fractions. I just don't understand them. So we started, this 4th grader, second day of school, what are we going to do every day to get better? And every day she does get better. She does a little something every day. We have another group that really came to us at conferences right before they did their student-led conferences and said, you know, my mom's going to ask me about this. I'm worried that I'm not working where I should be working or where I know I can be working. And so every day they do a little bit of 2-digit, you know, larger number multiplication because they want to be working on division and they know that they have that potential. So I think that this kind of education allows them to know that and to work on that. But also sometimes they don't like to work on the things that they know they need to get better at. So helping them to really understand that is where we're going next.
Right.
Because they would rather, like, one little girl would rather read her book. I like reading. I'm good at reading. I'd rather read. And so, you know, that's one thing where we need to go next. We have those kids that know what they need to work on.
Getting them motivated to work on those. And we have some that are very
finding
motivated.
a way
but that's the nice thing is that those kids can stay. They're not pushed past where they are. They can stay and continue to work until they get it, but they're not stalled out because they're still conferencing and they're still analyzing their errors. And so they might be there for the whole year, but it's not like they're just stuck there. It's that they're digging deeper and growing within themselves along the way.
That's probably one of the best explanations I've heard of that issue of kids not getting too far behind because you're building around that skill even while they're still working on it. What's the difference in the relationship between teacher and student? How is this different than in a traditional setting?
It honestly started out harder for me, I think, because I wasn't instantly connected with every single child. The first day they didn't leave and I didn't know. I knew all of them and I knew what they were interested in, but not as deep of a level as I did in my age-specific classroom from the instant. But now, even 2 weeks in, having those deep conversations and really getting to dig deeper in things that they're interested in and seeing them apply it, I think there's a relationship now that's not a teacher-student relationship. It's really a learner and learner because we're learning along the way with them and having that connection where they know that we make mistakes and they know that we're still learning and there's like almost a different kind of trust or connection in there that we're able to build with each other. I don't know.
Is a large part of that because you have more chance for individual conversation? I mean, is that
I would say that's a big part of it. But there are kids too that if there's an issue, they will go to Mrs. Moody, and there's kids that if they have an issue, they'll come to me, and that's perfectly fine. But I do feel that now I know and have a connection with every kid in that room. Some stronger than others because that's just how it works, but...
How's the role of the teacher changed? It sounds like there's a different set of skills that you need to refine in this setting as opposed to an age-specific classroom.
I think the organization, I'm not organized. I don't know why I would even call myself that, but I think the way that I liked to almost micromanage my classroom before this, now since I've stepped back and said, they have to be responsible for their things or they have a responsibility. It's not turning it into me anymore. I'm going to check to make sure everybody's got their stuff done. Having that, I think that they, I don't think I'm doing a very good job of explaining this. Like they look at me different.
But we're not teaching them to meet our standards now. We're trying to teach them or encourage them to do it for themselves, kind of.
Well, and I think that my role before, and maybe I had a very traditional, I don't know what to call it, a very traditional way of my classroom before. They would come to me and then I would find the answers for them. And now my role is that's a great wonder. I'm wondering that too. Let's go out and let's find it. What can we use? Where can we go? You don't know how to do 2-digit by 2-digit. Instead of me saying, come here, let's sit down, I'm going to work with you on it, I'll say, where could we go to look? Where could we go to find this information? And I think that that's been a really big switch, and they now see me as like an equal playing field.
Right, that's what I meant, learner to learner. It's like a different, it's not, I don't think we're their bosses. Does that make sense? Not that I was their boss before, but I was in charge. In the classroom, if I said sit down, you sat down. If I said use the dictionary instead of the iPad, they use the dictionary instead of the iPad. And now we've had to kind of, and it's still a struggle sometimes, but step back and say, okay, now what are you going to do? Well, can we have a meeting with you? Sure, you can have a meeting with us, but can I ask a different friend? Sure, go have that conversation with a friend, and letting go of me being in charge and letting them kind of take charge on stuff.
And then the great part is going back and checking in with that learner. How did you find this? And what did you do? And they are so excited. Instead of them learning it because I taught them, they learned it because they taught. And it is so rewarding to see how excited they are.
I had 2 girls yesterday that were going through and analyzing each other's math work. And the one had errors. And she wasn't mad. And the one didn't say, you're wrong. They went through and they figured out and they really analyzed where she went wrong. And then she said, oh, I get it now. So seeing them take and analyze their things on their own, and then being able to discuss it. Yeah, instead of me saying, this is where you went wrong, now go fix it. She was able to find it and then work with somebody else and really fix that on her own. And then it means more to her now because she's the one that made that step better.
Oh, excellent. Well, I could go on with 10 more questions, but I want to be cognizant of time. So first I'll turn to Paul. Paul, is there anything that you wanted to follow up on? Or
Yeah, I just would like to know, and I'll have you direct this at Lenny, so we
Okay.
can,
Okay.
just have you still maintain the same eye focus. But for those who would be skeptical about the very wide range of ages working together in your classrooms, how would you answer that? How does that work? How is it good for learning, good for the students?
They are hearing something above them and below them all day long.
Every day.
Whether they know that they're hearing it or not, they are. And it is amazing. They are taking it. They are teaching each other. They are learning with each other. You know, we had a lot of parents that are like, well, I don't want to put my first grader in there because they're going to find out Santa Claus isn't real. Our older learners that know that Santa Claus isn't real, they are not going to devastate the lower learners. I mean, I think that
They have a sense of community within each other.
And they respect each other. So I think that by not allowing them to have that is almost not allowing them to have an experience that is like a sibling. I mean, you know, you're going to fight with your siblings. But I don't know how to describe
I always
it.
connect it back to, I worked in a daycare all through college, and you had the infant room, and then you had the pre-toddler, the toddler, and the next step. Well, nobody in the infant room crawled, and then they got sent to this next room, and all of a sudden they're crawling within a week because they're seeing each other crawl. And then nobody in that room walked, and then they got sent to the next room, and all of a sudden they're walking. And that always bothered me because it was like, imagine how much these kids could advance, but we're making them stick here and then stick here and then stick here, and there was and then a kid would get to the preschool room and they would be so frustrating because they had no idea what was expected of them. Well, that's because they've never been in that type of environment before. So these kids are able to learn from each other. Like she said, multiple times a day they hear things that they already know and things that they've never heard of. And even our highest level academically kids are not necessarily our highest in other areas, so they're still hearing that. And it's like, if you go to out in the community, if you go and are part of a cancer walk, you're interacting with people from every single age group. So why not teach them that now? Why not teach them how to do that and how to respect each other? Because even in the real world, if I see someone that can't make it across the street on their own, do I just leave them in the middle of the street, or do I go help them? And same with back to your analogy, if they don't know it, do I tell them and tear them down, or do I just ignore it and keep going with my day?
Okay, so in my fractions lesson, this morning, I pulled a group over that is multiplying a mixed number by a fraction. And we needed to just go back and talk about what actually multiplication was and what fractions are and how you multiply a fraction by a fraction and doing the fraction models. And this friend wasn't in this multiplying fractions group, but she's getting very close to it. So she keeps scooting closer and closer and closer. And before I know it, she's sitting in our lesson because she's right at that edge. So I think that's what's most amazing to me is that they want
to learn it. And that's like her, those two fraction groups we were talking about. Today's a fraction day, so that's why we're so stuck on fractions. But her group that's right here and my group that's right here in the gap that's kind of closing, they played a fraction game together the other day. So they were able to explain to each other. They're not in the same group, and they know they're not in the same group, but they both know, hey, I'm learning about this, and I just learned about this, so why not connect it? And that's cool. Yeah.
Brian, did you have any? No. Or Paul, did you have more?
Nope.
Sorry, you can tell we like to talk.
Yeah.
So, no, I think what I'm going to do, though, is offer one last... Is there something you wished we would have talked about that we didn't talk about here?
No, I just think that, going back to that, what would you tell someone if they're interested in getting into it? Study the growth mindset.
And share it with your kids. Don't study it and keep it to yourself. We didn't show our kids the first week of school, but eventually when we showed our kids, it was like a whole change in our room. Because when they buy into it and when they want to have the growth mindset, it's so much better than when we just know about it and want to push it.
And they will call me on it because I struggle between knowing the growth mindset and having a little bit of a fixed one at times. I don't know if I'm completely on the growth mindset all the time. So they'll say, well, but Mrs. Moody, you have to add yet.
Yeah, or they'll say, the same with positivity. So we've shared, how do we be positive? And they'll say, oh, you're not very positive today, Miss Kaufman. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, I'm not. So what do I need to do to change it? And sometimes they'll give advice, like you need to have another cup of coffee. Or like, go get a drink and come back, And this, having them, I think before in my room, I kept a lot to myself. I knew it was good. But now with her encouragement a lot, because she's the one that really crossed that barrier, sharing it with them. Why am I keeping it to myself? If they're the ones that need to do it, why am I not showing it to them?
And instead of me giving them strategies, having the community, let's brainstorm. If I know I get off task when I sit by my friends, what can I do? Or I know that math isn't my favorite subject, so what can I do to really help me be a better math learner? And having the kids talk to each other, because just being there to help guide and direct and allowing them to take the room over is amazing.
Mm-hmm.